Afternoon, everyone. We are so pleased to have all of you with us today. My name is Phil Hansen. I'm the president of Global Minnesota. We hold a lot of events throughout the year at Global Minnesota, and we try to make sure we mix up some of our virtual opportunities with live in-person opportunities. And so we're excited to be together for this virtual program we're sharing with you today on Arctic diplomacy with Jim DeHart. We're excited for Jim. I'll give Jim more of an introduction in just a moment. Former state department coordinator for the Arctic region, who's going to lead it, is lending really to us his expertise and time today. And we're super thankful that Jim's willing to do this with us. Global Minnesota, of course, we're interested in world affairs, even at the farthest reaches of the earth, and the Arctic region is particularly important given the recent attention that it's seen on the global stage. A little bit about Global Minnesota. We are actually celebrating our 75th anniversary this year. We started all the way back in 1951 as an organization to welcome international students to Minnesota, and over time evolved to increase our programming to ensure that all people felt welcome coming here. We had this wonderful motto that we started out with, and it rings true for us today, that they came as strangers, may they leave as friends. So we try here as part of our organization to advance international understanding and engagement through our mission in the organization. And through that effort, part of it's educational and part of it's getting people involved in trying to help Minnesota be the most welcoming state we can. So again, we are a gathering place for community and connection, a place to gain exposure to different cultures and viewpoints, and really to try to hear firsthand insights into critical international topics and programs. As you can see from the screen here, we have a range of different kinds of programming you can join us for, whether it's our world events programming, which includes presentations and programs from diplomats and international subject matter experts, our K through 12 children's educational programming, or professional exchanges that we do as part of delegation visits that come here through the United States State Department, our corporate engagement programs for our business community, giving them opportunities for access and insights to global leaders, our discussion groups where we'll take on some of the toughest international topics amongst folks. If you'd like to join one of those, it's a great experience to be a part of. And of course, we've continued our work over a year to provide cultural, social programming, and even professional development programming for our international students. All in all, Global Minnesota on an annual basis is a very busy organization, over 560 activities, touching over 151 different countries, and 23,000 people participated with our programs last year. There's something for everyone really on the international front with us, and we hope you'll join us for more programming as the year goes forward. I did mention our 75th anniversary to you. As part of that, we have a long history. We believe Global Minnesota has now engaged something north of over 1 million individuals in the organization over the past 75 years. That's only been possible because of the tremendous members that we have supporting the organization. As you can see here, we have a very large corporate contingent of companies, over 50 companies, as corporate members that we're very thankful for their ongoing support, where they have an opportunity to not only participate in the programs, but support all the things we do. And of course, our individual members who have been just tremendous supporters of the organization, very loyal, and appreciate the kinds of programming that we bring to the community. If you would like to join us as a member, we would certainly welcome that. You can be a part of a community that cares about the world, that supports global programming, that believes that connecting with the world is an important and valuable thing to us and to our communities. And we would certainly welcome you to join us as part of our membership group here. It's a great community, as I said. There's a lot of ways you can become a member. You can certainly go onto our website and find information there at globalminnesota.org, and we hope you take a look at that. Later on, I think they're going to add to the chat for you all a membership link to us as well, if you would like to join us and become a member with Global Minnesota. Today, for our subject that we're going to be talking about with Jim DeHart, is going to be a spotlight that's been on of course, there's been a spotlight on the Arctic now for the last few years as climate change has melted ice caps and opened up new sea routes. Russia's participation in the Arctic Council and China's increasing interest in the region has really thrust Arctic diplomacy to the forefront of the global power dynamics, and it'll be interesting to hear Jim's reflections on that. Most recently, as you're well aware, the United States has also expressed renewed interest in Greenland, highlighting its strategically desirable location. And I think that may be part of the mix of conversation as well. Jim will help us to better understand all these issues, having served in the State Department as the U.S. coordinator for the Arctic region from 2020 to 2022. I'm going to give more of an introduction now to Jim. Jim retired from the State Department or Department of State with the senior rank of Minister Counselor in 2025. During his 33-year career, he served as the U.S. Consul General in Vancouver, Canada, and is the U.S. Coordinator for Afghan Special Immigrant Visas, as well as the U.S. Coordinator for the Arctic region, as I mentioned. Jim served twice in Afghanistan and also helped to lead the evacuation of American citizens and Afghan allies from Kabul, as well as leading the Afghanistan Task Force in Washington. He has served as the Deputy Chief of Mission in Oslo, Norway, acting Deputy Assistant Secretary in the Bureau of International Narcotics and Law Enforcement, among a variety of other very interesting placements. With Jim today and being our moderator today, we have Erin Hart. Erin is a global Minnesota program director. She is also a former U.S. Foreign Service officer. Her assignments included Washington, D.C., Kabul, Afghanistan, Muscat, Oman, and Baghdad, Iraq. So I'm very pleased to have both Erin and Jim here for a very interesting conversation. Two wonderful professionals that are sharing of their time today. Jim, huge thanks to you for joining us to be a part of this conversation. And now I'll turn it over to you and to Erin. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Phil, for the introduction. And I would also like to personally welcome everyone for being with us today. And also Jim DeHart. Our paths crossed in Afghanistan roughly 16 years ago, and I've been delighted to follow your career, and I'm excited for this opportunity to speak with you today. So thanks, Jim. So I'm just going to dive in to some initial questions, and then after I've had my fill of grilling Jim on all things Arctic diplomacy, I will open it up to the audience for questions. If you do think of your question in the meantime, please go ahead and enter that in the Q&A box in the Zoom function, and we will try to make sure to answer everyone's questions. So, Jim, I thought we could start off our conversation today by looking at your role as a U.S. coordinator for the Arctic region. Were you the first incumbent in this role? And how long has this been a position for a U.S. diplomat? What were your primary responsibilities or areas of focus in the role? And have you traveled to the region? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Erin. I appreciate that, and great to see you again outside of Afghanistan. And Phil, thanks very much for the introduction. And it's great to be here talking with Minnesotans. So I was appointed as the U.S. coordinator for the Arctic region back in the summer of 2020. That was during the first term of President Trump, towards the end of the first term. And the position was a new one. They created it and then asked me to fill it. There had been a previous similar position under the Obama administration, a position of special representative for the Arctic. It was held by Coast Guard Admiral Robert Papp. That job, though, was pretty specifically focused on the Arctic Council, and that's a body that we could, I'm sure, talk more about. But when I came into the picture, it was because we had a lot of people across the Department of State and across the U.S. government who were doing things that were doing work in the Arctic. They were responsible for security or defense matters. They were conducting bilateral relations with the different governments in the Arctic region. They were responsible for science, including related to climate. They were working on critical minerals or other resource issues, trade and business. And so all this work was happening, but it was happening in different places. And the administration wanted to make sure that we had one coherent, coordinated policy toward the Arctic. And so they asked me to do that. And it was a great job. It was a lot of fun, and not a lot of bureaucracy. I didn't have a huge staff. I didn't have to supervise or manage a lot of people, but instead I got to meet a whole lot of experts in every working on every conceivable issue in the Arctic, learned a lot, and got to engage a lot of great allies overseas.
Excellent. Thank you. And would you has the uh, other administrations, as the years have gone on since you left the position in 2022, has that position continued
The
to exist?
position has continued. After I departed, it was actually elevated to a Senate confirmed ambassador position,
Oh, okay.
and it was filled for a period of time by a good friend of mine, Ambassador Mike Sfraga.
Mm.
But the position is currently vacant, although there is still an office there.
Okay, great. Thank you. And thank you for placing for us where you lived and thrived in the bureaucracy that many of us know and love so well. I also thought maybe to start off our conversation, we could place for folks what we mean when we say Arctic nations. And this might be a good time for us to bring out our map. So maybe you could go through for us, Jim, what countries you engaged with in the role and sort of what countries are in the mix as we look at the region today.
Yes, and if I could ask Addie to bring up the map, and there's some interesting features here, I think. Well, first of all, and this is how I looked at the world when I was the coordinator for the Arctic region. There are 8 Arctic states: the United States, Canada, Russia, and then the Nordic countries: Norway, Sweden, Finland, Iceland, and then also Denmark by virtue of its possession of Greenland. And I think it's worth noting a few things here. First of all, there really isn't a single Arctic region. There's sort of 2 different Arctics in a way. If you look at most of Russia across Siberia, and then the Arctic portion of Alaska and Canada and Greenland, this is an Arctic that is very remote, very inhospitable conditions, not a lot of people living there, great distances that are empty, and really lacking in infrastructure. But then there's also a part of the Arctic that is pretty well populated, and that's the European Arctic, and sort of the top side of the map there, the Nordic countries, Norway, Sweden, Finland, and in fact that area of Russia around Murmansk and Arkhangelsk, which is basically where most of the people who live above the Arctic Circle are living in that area there. So if you're a Norwegian living above the Arctic Circle, life probably doesn't feel all that much different than if you're living somewhere in Norway below the Arctic Circle. Lots of infrastructure, lots of services. Weather's a bit colder, but not horribly cold. But if you're living, in the north of Canada or the far north of Alaska, it's a whole different picture of remoteness. And then, of course, you've got a whole center of Greenland where nobody is living at all. So, there's roughly 5 million people in the world living above the Arctic Circle. Only about 15,000 of those are in the state of Alaska. Greenland has about 56,000 people. Northern Canada, comparable, small population. And most of the people are in the European area that I mentioned before. I think another interesting feature, the indigenous communities that are really across the Arctic. And I would particularly note the Inuit who live in the far east of Russia. And there's an Inuit belt that extends from there across Alaska and Canada into Greenland, which is essentially one people, largely speaking the same language, and a lot of interest among them in staying in contact with each other, and they think of each other as family. Um, and I think another interesting thing to point out, if you see the capital of Greenland, Nuuk, Nuuk is closer to Washington, D.C., also on this map, than it is to Copenhagen, Denmark. Copenhagen is about roughly 2,200 miles from Nuuk. Washington, D.C. is a little bit over 2,000 miles. Greenland is very much a part of North America geographically, although not politically. We should talk about that. And then what I most want to point out here is the state of Alaska, which is the reason that the United States is an Arctic nation. You know, I think those of us who live in the lower 48, which is how Alaskans think of us, we tend to think of Alaska as being sort of a frontier and in a remote corner of the globe. But I think we could think of Alaska really as being at the center of it all, quite a hub. So consider this: Ted Stevens International Airport in Anchorage every year is one of the top 5 airports in the world when it comes to cargo volume. The amount of cargo that moves through the airport there in Anchorage. Usually they're around number 3, number 4 in the world. And that's because of its connectivity to important markets and important producers. It really is at a crossroads. Consider also the fact that the United States has more than 50 F-35 Joint Strike Fighters deployed at Eielson Air Base in Alaska at any given time. And that's a large number of F-35s. The reason being, they can reach virtually any point in the Northern Hemisphere from Alaska. And they are flying missions not just in potential defense of Russia, but all the way down East Asia, running Indo-Pacific missions as well. So I like to think of Alaska not as some remote corner of the world, but really as a strategic platform for the U.S.
Right. Thank you. Yeah. It's really interesting to look at the world from this perspective, and really helpful to have you walk us through that. I did not know that Nuuk and Washington, D.C. were so close miles wise. So thank you for that. I think I'd asked this earlier, but were you able to travel to the region as part of your position? Or I know it was partially during the pandemic, but which of these countries did you visit in your role?
Yeah, I was able to make it to all of the Arctic states except for Russia in my time, and maybe I could talk a bit later about the visit to Greenland. But yes, visited everywhere. By the time I came into the role, relations were sliding downward with Russia, and I had considered a trip there, but that became untenable after a while, so I did not make it there.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, excellent. So now we've placed you and we've placed the Arctic. So I thought next we could turn to why. Why is the Arctic region becoming increasingly important for U.S. national security and economic interests? And in this strategic competition, which countries are the main players in this competition? And those, might not necessarily be the Arctic nations. And what are these countries trying to achieve in the region?
Yeah, thanks. And I'm going to pull a fast one on Addie here and ask her to
Oh,
restore the
okay.
map for just a
Okay.
minute.
Sure.
Talk about maybe some of the security dimensions of the Arctic here. So the Arctic region has always been important including in the Cold War context, for reasons that we don't really like to think about. But in the event of nuclear war, the missiles take the shortest route and largely pass over the Arctic region. And so the Arctic has always been very important from the standpoint of nuclear strategy. and the old dew line early warning system that runs across North America, and now being modernized. Our joint command with Canada, NORAD, which is for early warning and missile defense. So that's been part of the strategic picture for a very long time. But now we're entering really into a new era because the Arctic is warming 3-4 times as fast as the rest of the planet. The sea ice is receding, and so it is becoming more accessible. Now it's not opening up immediately because in fact some conditions are getting more variable and actually trickier to deal with. But generally, the trend is toward much greater accessibility in the Arctic, and so we are already seeing cruise ships companies building new vessels so they can send tourists up deep into the Arctic. We're seeing the fish, all sorts of fish stocks migrating north, and so the fishing fleets are following, and the illegal fishing is also following up north. We're seeing different companies looking at possibilities of resource extraction and making plans there. And as all this human activity shifts north or starts to plan to shift north, we have to then think about what are our search and rescue capabilities if something goes wrong, or if there's an oil spill, what are our pollution response capabilities. So essentially, it really boils down to an Arctic region that is becoming busier and will be busier in the years and the decades ahead. Probably the biggest economic interest so far that people are focused on is on shipping routes. And so if you look at Russia there, the Northern Sea route potentially connects and does connect Europe to East Asia right over the top, and potentially avoids the necessity of going through the Suez Canal, essentially, by taking this northern route. Shaves a lot of travel time for cargo vessels and saves a lot of fuel. It's still really a difficult route, but it is being used, and a lot of Russian vessels are doing shorter routes along the top. But there's quite a lot of economic interest. Those vessels then, by the way, after passing over the north of Russia, cut through the Bering Strait there right off the coast of Alaska, which raises all sorts of economic opportunities along with risks. There's also, to the north of Canada there, the Northwest Passage, which is a much trickier route. There's a lot less economic interest in that route at the moment, but that could change, I think, in the years ahead. Keep the map up there for just maybe a little bit longer. The security risks that we see emanate mainly from Russia and China. Looking again at where Murmansk is on the map there in Russia, the Kola Peninsula is home to a lot of Russia's most important military capabilities, hypersonic missiles, their nuclear armed and nuclear powered submarines. Many of them set sail from there, pass over Northern Europe. And by the way, super helpful to have allies like the Norwegians up there who can help us be aware of those movements of Russian submarines. So the risks from Russia are really traditional hard power risks, I would say. Okay, I think we can probably take this map away. Thank you, Addie. And to talk about China, the other part of that, and when I was first appointed in the role, the Trump administration was very, very focused on the potential risks that China posed in the Arctic, because And those risks, I think, are not so much hard power risks. They're really a little bit more in the realm of soft power, where the Chinese, who they view themselves as a global power, they want to be present in the Arctic. They see that as key to their economic future, and I think also for security for security reasons. They have made an active effort in recent years to try to establish footholds in different parts of the Arctic. So to gain access to ports through promises of investment, to get mining licenses, to get a stake in an airport, and to establish ground radar stations for polar satellites. Anything that would basically get them on the ground. And Chinese Navy, PRC Navy, that's been much more present in the Arctic in recent years. Science vessels that they send there. These activities that on the surface look like civilian or economic activities also have potential to meet their security interests. So if you send a science vessel to map the undersea, you might be doing that because you want to go mine it later, or you might be doing it because you want to be able to send your submarines there later, and you need to map that seafloor. So as one example. So these are the kinds of risks that we have to be aware of and track. In the case of China, we've done a lot of work with our allies to be more careful about investment, to set up investment screening legislation, not to say no to all Chinese investment automatically, but to make sure that we're always taking a look at it through a security lens and making sure that it doesn't pose some sort of threat. For example, in the telecommunications sector with Huawei, which was such a big issue for so long. My personal view about this is we don't need to panic about threats in the Arctic. A lot of this is longer term. We just need to be aware. We need to plan for it. And we need to be investing ourselves in capabilities and presence so that we are aware of what is happening in the region.
Excellent, thank you. And I'm sure we'll have further questions about the strategic competition and other countries in the region and their interests. I did want to make sure we have time to discuss Greenland before we open it up to the audience Q&A. Of course, we all have been following the headlines and statements made by the administration about Greenland. Could you elaborate for us, what your understanding is of what the administration wants to achieve by acquiring Greenland? And also for us, what international treaties or laws sort of govern our relationship with Denmark and Greenland? And have there been any, recent developments in the administration's diplomacy? I think we saw that Secretary of State Marco Rubio had some meetings, I think, a month or two ago. Also wanted to touch on, if you could, the diplomatic presence in Nuuk, the capital of Greenland. I know the U.S. had a new-ish consulate there, and there are some other countries that might have been opening or establishing a diplomatic presence. So sorry, that's a lot of questions in one.
Yeah.
I would just say Greenland.
Greenland.
Thank you.
Greenland, where to begin? So Greenland is strategically important, I believe. I think that our administration is not wrong about that. And in a warming Arctic in the decades ahead, Greenland will become increasingly important, I think. I think about our purchase of Alaska back in 1867, where obviously quite a different time, but that whole initiative was laughed at, and Secretary of State Seward, it was called Seward's Folly. People thought it was ridiculous. Why would we want to go and buy this remote chunk in the far north? And I think we realize today, well, what a brilliant move that was, considering Alaska's strategic importance. So we could kind of envision, I think, a similar future in Greenland. However, times have changed. Denmark possesses Greenland, but the Greenlanders have home rule and their own agency, and neither Danes nor Greenlanders want to sell. They've made that, I think, crystal clear. So, I think that while the administration is right about Greenland's strategic importance, how they're going about their agenda, in my view, is dead wrong. This is not an era where we threaten to change borders by force. That's not a world we want to live in. It's ethically bankrupt to threaten allies. It diminishes and weakens NATO, and it's a gift to Vladimir Putin, in my view. But I actually also think that it just runs counter to the administration's own goals. The administration has been very focused on burden sharing among our allies, and has seen a lot of progress in our NATO allies stepping up and contributing more to our common defense. Greenland, a purchase of Greenland is not a one-off cost. There's a series of recurring expenses here, and it's quite an expensive place. The Danes contribute annually a big block grant to support life in Greenland, and along with the money that they provide for the rule of law sector of the police, it's upwards of $1 billion a year that the Danes provide. And so I have a hard time seeing the United States fill that gap if we were to go that route. Particularly at a time when a lot of Americans are hurting and we have our own Arctic in Alaska that we really need to be investing in. So, it's also been written a lot that we have what we need from our great allies, the Danes, and from the Greenlanders at the moment. And I think that's generally true. We have a mutual defense agreement with Denmark dating from 1951. It's very forward-leaning. It allows us to do a lot, including having our Pituffik space base up in the north. That's essential for awareness and missile defense for us. That 1951 agreement was updated in 2004 to reflect Greenland's home rule. And we also have a defense cooperation agreement with Denmark that we just negotiated and concluded in 2023, updating our arrangements with them. So we have a lot of these good frameworks. And my sense is that if there's things that we want to do that are new in Greenland, the Danes and Greenlanders would work with us. But here's where I think we're really making a mistake. When I visited in Nuuk back in 2020, I found that the doors were wide open. I mean, Greenlanders are so interested in diversifying their relationship beyond Denmark. They see that as a colonial relationship. They want to move beyond it. They eventually want to get to independence. They want to have relations with other governments. So we opened a consulate there as well in 2020, which was a great move in the first Trump term. But now I'm afraid we've squandered that success really with our threats to Greenlanders that are taken very, very poorly there. And so I think we've got to turn the corner here and work to rebuild that trust and get back to partnership, both with Greenlanders and with Danes. And I think if we can do that, we will meet our security goals working together with our allies.
Right. Thank you. And which other countries have consulates in Nuuk? Were we the first, or are there others there now that weren't there when we opened ours?
Yeah, I think we were actually the first because we had a consulate way back in the very early 50s that we closed in, I think it was 1953. So when we opened in 2020, it was a reopening of our consulate. Iceland had a consulate as well, and I went and I visited the Icelandic Consul General during my visit in 2020, and that was great. Canada has now just cut the ribbon on a new consulate there, and their foreign minister just visited. Brought a huge plane full of Inuit representatives from Canada, which was I thought, really smart diplomacy. And the French are on their way to opening a consulate in Greenland as well. So there's this international interest that's definitely brewing.
Thank you. I have one last question before I'll open it up to the audience, so everyone can think of their questions in the meantime. So to sort of wrap up my bit, what would you say Arctic diplomacy looks like in practice? I think you've mentioned the Arctic Council. What is the Arctic Council? Is it, part of the UN? Is it something separate? Are there UN bodies that that look at the Arctic or have involvement in the region?
Yeah. So well, first off, I think our diplomacy starts with the bilateral relationships that we have and the engagements with the various Arctic states, and particularly our close allies in the region. The Arctic Council, which consists of all of the Arctic states, is a great organization. It's been around for a while. It has been traditionally highly collaborative, and I think what was distinctive about the Arctic Council was that it included Russia as an Arctic state, and for many years was a place where we could collaborate together with Russia, even when there were tensions elsewhere in the relationship. The other distinctive feature is it includes the permanent participants, who are the different indigenous groups around the Arctic who are represented. And they sit at the main table with states, not at I'll call it the kids' table, where the observer states sit. So it's interesting, and it's done a lot of good work. Economic development, science, has a science agreement, emergency preparedness. The work has really fallen off necessarily since Russia's follow-up invasion of Ukraine, for very necessary reasons. So the Arctic Council is not as active now as it used to be. Hopefully we get to a position with Russia where it makes sense, where we can restore the good work that it does. There are some other groups worth noting. There's the International Maritime Organization that came up with a polar code on safe navigation for vessels through the Arctic. It's important. It does a lot of good work. And then I would note the United Nations, the Convention on the Law of the Sea. And the United States is not a signatory, but we basically follow the law of the sea. Really important for the Arctic, where the territorial waters are set, the exclusive economic zones, and then the process to determine where each country's extended continental shelf is. All of this happens under the framework of the law of the sea, and we are participants in that process. And then I would say, these international rules, they work very heavily in the U.S. favor because we are an Arctic state. We really benefit from those rules in the Arctic.
Great. Thank you. Let's see. I'm going to peek into the Q&A box. We have one question so far, which is actually something I think I would have asked you also. A number of us here at Global Minnesota attended a foreign policy update event about a month ago with one of our local diplomats in residence. And as part of his presentation, he showed us, he did mention the Arctic, but he showed us a slide or a graphic with icebreakers. The ships that, this is not my area of expertise at all. I believe they break ice. So, but the graphic was a little bit startling. And I think our takeaway was that Russia has by far a big lead on icebreakers compared to the United States. And so the question from our audience member is why does Russia have this lead or this advantage on us? And my question would be, what does this mean for us, and how that matters?
Yeah, well, it does matter. and it is a problem for the United States. So the U.S., we currently have a heavy icebreaker, the Polar Star, which operates in the Arctic, but especially it operates around Antarctica and supplies our science station there. And then the Healy, which is a mid-size icebreaker. Both the Polar Star and the Healy have been around a long time. They're old ships. They're kind of past really their expected life. We have our Coast Guard has also a newer vessel that that's brought into action. Its name eludes me now, but it's basically a lease, and it's not a highly capable vessel. So we are really short on icebreakers at the moment. We have the Coast Guard does have a program to build new polar security cutters, as they are called, and they will be great ships, multi-dimensional, multi-mission vessels. But they are, it is real slow. It takes a long time to build a good icebreaker. So the first one may still be years away, and then it's going to take longer to get the rest. I think the comparison with Russia can be a little bit inflated because Russia has 50-something icebreakers, but most of them are really just to operate around its northern coast, and they're not really equipped to go further. They do have some that operate more broadly internationally, and we do need to be concerned about that. I worry actually a little bit more about China, which is also investing significantly in including in nuclear-powered icebreakers, and has some good capabilities already and growing those capabilities. So we are not winning the icebreaker race at this time, and these vessels will be used for quite a few years to come.
Thank you. We also have a couple questions from our audience about climate change and environmental protections or impacts. Could you speak a little bit to, what the Arctic nations might be doing, together or independently on climate change? Or, I think that's sort of a fraught topic these days, but what sort of environmental protections might be in place for countries who are becoming more active in the region?
Yeah, well, I would say that we've seized our leadership on climate change. Obviously, if I can, an understatement, I guess, to say the least. I used to point out that most of our thinking about the Arctic and our action, our policy toward the Arctic, a lot of it has been very bipartisan, nonpartisan. Same kinds of interests, same worries about Russia, same worries about China, interest in economic development, critical minerals, all these things. Obviously, big issue that has separated administrations has been on climate. The Biden administration was very focused on climate, including as it pertained to the Arctic. What happens in the Arctic doesn't really cause climate change for the most part, because as I mentioned before, huge swaths of the Arctic have very little economic activity. And so, a generator running on fuel in some remote Arctic community is not big enough to contribute meaningfully to the climate problem, but it is a big recipient of economic activities elsewhere in the world. And it sees the impact of climate change much more quickly than most other parts of the world. So it is, for scientists, an extraordinarily important place to be monitoring and studying climate change and understanding its effects. And there has generally for a long time been excellent cooperation among the Arctic states and more broadly to do that, and have a network of scientists who are examining this and working together on that. So, our current administration that's not a problem that they're focused on. They're interested in seeing the oil and gas come out of the Arctic, same as anywhere else in the world. I guess my last comment on this would be, generally, in my experience, private companies, business wants predictability. And so I don't think that American companies really want to see the swings from one side to the next. One administration seals off the Alaska Wildlife Refuge from economic activities. The next administration throws the door open and tries to sell off leases as fast as possible to companies, and then it swings back the other way and back and forth. I think U.S. companies would benefit from a straighter line and a more predictable set of expectations.
Thank you. Yeah. So you just ended with some economic and considerations from the business communities. We did have a question here. If you could speak a little bit more about economic development in the Arctic, including practical U.S. interests coming out of Alaska or interests of the other big U.S. business players. Are there any regional rules of the road and what may be needed as we look out at the economic horizon 5 or 10 years into the future?
Yeah. So I had the opportunity as Arctic coordinator to contribute to the Biden administration's national strategy for the Arctic region, and a number of us worked hard to give it a greater economic focus, a greater focus on livelihoods. I thought it was actually a weakness of the Obama administration's Arctic policy that there was that very heavy emphasis on conservation and the environment, which was good, but sort of at the expense, I guess, of the focus on the fact that people are living there as well, including in our own state of Alaska, and they need livelihoods. They need investment and economic activity. So that was very much a focus in the Biden administration strategy. The fact is, there's big opportunities across the Arctic, including critical minerals, also big expenses. I mean, it remains a really expensive place to operate. There are other parts of the world, maybe easier places to go get critical minerals than lots of parts of the Arctic. I think as a government, we have to, because budgets are stretched and finite, we have to think about those investments that have real dual use value. So, for example, with NORAD, and we have to modernize our early warning systems. We have to refurbish old platforms or create new platforms. As we do that, that opens up the possibility really of spin-off effects for communities there and for private companies to come in and leverage those investments that are being made on the defense side, I think. We've seen with the Air Force has invested in new satellite communications because our security assets have to be able to communicate with headquarters while they're operating in Arctic waters or in the Arctic air space. And that, at the same time, those enhanced communications deliver broadband to Arctic communities on the civilian side. So that's a dual use benefit. I think that's how we need to be thinking about this. What can we do with our limited resources to invest in a way that catalyzes some larger opportunities, right? A road can simultaneously connect a remote community to a hospital and to schools, while also providing now a route to get products to market, to get critical minerals to market, and so forth. We have to think about linking these different investments and leveraging them for a bigger catalytic effect.
Thank you. All right, so we've got about 9 minutes left. So I'm going to group a couple questions together so we can make sure to address as many as we can. You mentioned critical minerals, and that's something we also see increasingly popping up in headlines and in statements by the administration. How important do you think is access to Greenland's rare earth minerals or elements to U.S. security. And then, secondly, one of our audience members asked about scientific community cooperation. As the current geopolitical security tensions continue, do you see this impacting the scientific cooperation that we've seen between countries in the Arctic?
Yeah. So first on critical minerals. So Greenland has a lot of critical minerals, valuable ones. And so I think it's an important domain there. It's also a pretty expensive place to get them. And Greenlanders are concerned about the impact on their lives and on the environment. And so I think any extraction of those has to be done in consultation and with a approval of local authorities there. I think critical minerals does tend to get exaggerated a bit sometimes as an issue because they are available in all parts of the world or lots of parts of the world. They can be gotten elsewhere. And the extraction of critical minerals doesn't solve the problem of processing, which is where the Chinese have really had a monopoly. So we can go get them, we can go dig them out of the ground, but ultimately there's very few places they can be processed. And it's difficult to start new processing facilities in the United States, environmentally controversial. So I think that's a challenge. So I think, at the moment, I think that we need to be working with the Greenlanders to see how to, work together to develop their minerals. A lot of Greenlanders want to because they see that as the path to economic viability for themselves and eventual independence. But it's not, it doesn't, there's a bigger problem there on the processing side, I think. On science cooperation, I think we've lost a lot of capacity in the U.S. government. Of course, with a lot of people have lost their jobs, including at science agencies, which I think hinders our capacity to do science in all sorts of domains, including the Arctic, and I think makes that cooperation that was just sort of par for the course before, it's made it more difficult with our international science partners. And Russia, we had a growing relationship on Arctic science within the Arctic Council with Russia. Even after the members of the Arctic Council solidified a science cooperation agreement among the members. I mean, it was still not perfect. The Russians were always very cautious about sharing any of their data, which was always a problem. But I think even now that very limited cooperation has fallen off a cliff. And it's a problem because I think the scientists are absolutely yearning for data from across the planet, not just from limited locations, which creates a lot more value if they can get that from a variety of locations. So at the moment, sad to say, I don't think prospects are very good for restoring that level of cooperation, and we're going to have to focus on Ukraine first.
Right. Okay, well, that brings us to the end of our Q&A, and I'm going to turn the microphone over back to Phil. But thank you so much, Jim, for taking the time to take us through the Arctic and answer as many of our questions as you could. It was really enjoyable. I personally learned a lot and hope to welcome you in person to Minnesota someday.